Good evening and welcome. My name is Kate Daniels and I'm your host for this edition of Evening Insight. What is civic literacy? Has civic disengagement increased to the point that we've become a nation of spectators? Stay with me for the hour for an engaging conversation with two local experts on tonight's broadcast, Advancing Civic Literacy in Our Lives and Our Schools. Evening Insight is broadcast from downtown Monterey at Cafe 316. Thank you for joining us, and this is Evening Insight.
Out-of-town guests appearing on Evening Insight are accommodated at the Inn at Del Monte Beach, offering urban elegance to discriminating travelers. Evening Insight is produced on location in downtown Monterey at Cafe 316, the place for coffee with a touch of sophistication in a Wi-Fi friendly and comfortable setting. Cafe 316 on Alvarado Street in downtown Monterey, opposite the Monterey Conference Center at Portola Plaza.
Welcome back to Cafe 316. Thank you for joining me for tonight's broadcast, Advancing Civic Literacy in Our Lives and Our Schools. Evening Insight is broadcast from Cafe 316 on the corner of Alvarado Street and Del Monte Boulevard. We'll spend the first half of our broadcast speaking with the Honorable Adrienne Grover, Judge of the Monterey County Superior Court, for a conversation about the constitutional role of our judiciary in local, state, and federal governments, and the need for civic education in our society and our schools. In the second half of the hour, I'll speak with educator Donna Alonza Vaught about our local schools and their role in civic education. Is there a need for a greater understanding of the judiciary? What is the meaning of judicial fairness, neutrality, and impartiality? Why is it important to inspire young people in this country to be active citizens in our democracy? Judge Grover is a judge of the Monterey County Superior Court. Most recently, she served as presiding judge for 2009 and 2010. Since her appointment in 2002, Judge Grover has handled assignments in criminal law, family law, drug treatment court, juvenile dependency, and mental health. Judge Grover was an associate at the San Francisco firm Long & Levitt before beginning her work in the public sector. She received her law degree from Santa Clara University School of Law. She pursued her undergraduate studies in linguistics at the University of California at Berkeley, and her graduate studies as a Rotary International Foundation Scholar at the Universität Bamberg in Germany. Judge Grover has taught property law at the Monterey College of Law and regularly serves as faculty in courses for new judges on ethics and access to the courts. Thank you for joining us, Judge Grover.
My pleasure. Appreciate the opportunity.
Let's start with your bio and cover a little bit of Civics 101 for all of us. What influenced your decision to become a judge?
Well, to become a judge, I really wasn't looking for that opportunity or looking for that change. I was the Monterey County Council at the time and was really engaged with the Board of Supervisors and all of our local issues and all the legal issues attendant to some of the things of concern. And just there was an upcoming retirement on the bench. I was fortunate to take the place of Richard Silver, who was very well known and respected on our local bench, and he actually suggested that I might think about it as he was going to be leaving, so I did apply then, but hadn't been thinking about it until then.
To become a lawyer, principally, does it require a certain level of civic engagement? I mean, would you say that lawyers in general are more civic-minded and engaged in general as compared to other citizens?
Perhaps so. I mean, it's hard to say because with any profession you have a wide spectrum of participants. But I'm always mindful of a comedian who was telling a joke about, well, the role of lawyers in society, they're the people where you're playing a game. They've actually read the rules on the underside of the box lid. So, you know, to a degree, there is that greater appreciation of some of the rules that are at play in our society, and maybe in that way, lawyers tend to be more engaged, but lawyers tend to be specialists also, and so are very engaged in their particular specialty, and but probably have a better sense for the role of the judiciary, the importance of the judiciary, the importance of the legislature, maybe more so than people who are engaged in other endeavors.
Well, let me throw some statistics out at you. Barely 1/3 of Americans can name all three branches of government. That I saw this in a recent poll, and another poll shows that 67% of Americans cannot name a Supreme Court case. I know Sarah Palin got a lot of flack for not being able to name a Supreme Court case beyond Roe v. Wade, but this is something that's common throughout more than half of our population. Does this reflect a basic problem of civic literacy?
Well, let me address a couple of those statistics. And you know, polls always depend on how you ask the question, when you ask the question, and of whom. I'll point out, I'm an optimist. That one statistic tells me that 33% of Americans can name a U.S. Supreme Court case, which I think is really pretty good. I don't know how many of us outside the medical field can name common surgical procedures, or, you know, so it shows that at least 1/3 of Americans are able to name something that's going on with the court. More troubling to me is this statistic about people not being able to even name the three branches of government, you know, not having that just basic understanding of how our government functions. That is very troubling because it shows to me that people are taking for granted all the things that happen, that work in this country. For example, every few years we have a peaceful, perfectly peaceful transition of power. If you look around the rest of the world, that is something that people want, or it's something, I mean, we have leaders right now refusing to, in other countries, refusing to acknowledge the outcome of elections that put someone else in power, and they're staying in office, resisting the people's vote. Or here, of course, we're in February 2011, and we've seen the revolution recently in Egypt, and I was particularly moved to see that people are just demanding the opportunity to actually have an election. Where they haven't had any kind of free elections and the development of different viewpoints and parties for decades. And when you think about it, in those recent protests, 300 people gave their lives protesting. And all we have to do is register and vote.
I think about that a lot in terms of reflecting on what we saw in Egypt. And I wonder how much we take for granted in this country these basic rights to be able to gather, to be able to vote in an election that's free and fair. I wonder if part of the civic disengagement is because there's the message is not clear. We're not understanding as a culture the value of our system. I mean, I hear complaints in the media when they interview people saying things like, I'm going to take back this country, that the country's somehow been stolen from us. Do you think that we understand as a nation, you know, truly what it means to not be free?
We're so blessed not to have that understanding. You know, we don't know what it would be like to not be able to vote, to not be assured that we'd have that opportunity to choose our leaders, to speak out against the government, to practice any religion or no religion, to be openly critical of someone in office or openly critical of law enforcement, openly critical of the military. I think as Americans have no idea what it would be like not to be able to exercise those freedoms. And we need to appreciate how lucky we are.
I work as an editor for a publication that we've got writers submitting stories from other countries in the region now talking about the pro-democracy protests that are taking place, and they are very fearful submitting these pieces and want to write under pseudonyms. And it's something I have to sit back and reflect on. It's like, wow, am I putting this person in danger? Because I so can't relate to not being able to freely express my feelings about our government, about anything that I'd like to complain about, and that's really an issue. Do you think that Egypt will cause Americans to reflect, or do you think it will have any kind of impact on our understanding of our democracy as a nation?
I think that depends on what kind of discourse follows. If it is treated as the story of the month, and then we're going to be thinking maybe every once in a while we'll hear about what kind of developments there are in terms of governing, what kind of encouragement there is to reignite tourism in Egypt. We might hear stories about Egypt, but if we don't hear stories and aren't pressed as a country to think about all the changes there and contrast them to the freedoms that we have here, I think that's going to be lost for the most part. But really what's disappointing is to think about people here who have the right to vote and don't even bother to exercise that right, where we have 50% or less is a typical voter turnout among registered voters, and that doesn't even include all the people who are eligible to register to vote and don't even register. So really I think there is a danger when things are going well and we have a system that works and really is in many ways a beautifully constructed thing. There's a danger of complacency and a danger that people will not appreciate it and not take the time to understand it fully, so that maybe they won't appreciate it until it's gone or threatened.
Right. I'm a new mom, and parents and guardians definitely play a role in civic values and attitudes, in being the influential teacher for a child. How can guardians enhance a child's learning of citizenship responsibilities?
I'm a parent myself, and I think just setting a good example and having a little fun with it, taking advantage of those teachable moments, waiting to vote until after work so that you can take your children with you to the polling place. And the poll workers are there prepared with sample ballots for children that they can fill out and stickers that say, I voted. So making it kind of something that we do. We vote regularly. Whenever we have the chance, we go to the polling place and we vote. And even then, I know a lot of people are voting by mail these days, but I think it's worth, as a parent, going through that exercise to go to the polling place and take advantage of that. And then other times too, when there are holidays like Lincoln's birthday or Memorial Day or Veterans Day, whatever it is, taking a moment to say, hey, the reason that you're out of school today is to celebrate President's Day or Martin Luther King Day, Cesar Chavez Day, whatever it is, and to just spend a moment at an age-appropriate level just saying, these are the contributions that this person made, and this is why we're celebrating this with a holiday, rather than just focusing on, there's no school, it's a 3-day weekend, what are we going to do? Just taking the 5 minutes to acknowledge, or the 4th of July.
Yeah, it's kind of a depressing topic that we're actually talking about right now in terms of civic engagement, and you've caused me to remember being in New York City, where I spent a great number of years during college and after college, and it was Veterans Day, and there was the big Veterans Day parade, and it was just going on, and everyone else was living their lives and doing their things, and here were these veterans from World War II walking down the street with their medals and their flags, and no one was even paying attention. I mean, it was like my sister and I, we started crying. We didn't know, it was really the disengagement, the lack of connection.
Well, and I think that's something, though, that can change with the times. I mean, I think given that, we've been at war for a number of years now, I think there really is a much greater appreciation for the sacrifices that people are making, and for supporting the people who are participating in our volunteer armed forces.
Well, let's go back to the judiciary just to understand. One question I do have is this local role as presiding judge. It's not something I was familiar with. Probably a lot of people who are outside the court system might not know what this means. What is a presiding judge?
A presiding judge is kind of the person who, for either a limited term or for an indefinite time, kind of is the head judge. But I say kind of because every judge in California is an independent constitutional officer. So when you're presiding judge, you're kind of making some administrative decisions. In the trial courts, you are assigning cases, assigning case types, deciding what kind of work distribution there's going to be. You're kind of the spokesperson for the court in many ways, because ethics rules prevent judges from talking about cases that are pending in their court. So if you see something covered on the news or in the newspaper, you'll never see the judge quoted, well, this is how I think the trial is going, or this is what I think about the evidence, because we're just not allowed to make that commentary. But in general issues, for example, the state budget crisis and how that is affecting access to justice in the courts. Last year, the courts were closed one day a month in response to budgetary things. Other issues that affect the justice system more broadly, the presiding judge would typically be called upon to kind of be the spokesperson. So you're making the administrative and policy decisions and kind of being the face of the court while you're in that position. And in most courts throughout the state, people serve for 2 years as presiding judge. And in our court and most courts, it's elected by the judges themselves, the person who will fill that role.
So to continue to understand the role of the judiciary, can you talk about the court's role in the three-part relationship of the legislative, judicial, and executive branches? Will you just sort of break it down for us?
I'm happy to do that. And let me just say, I mean, it sounds corny, but the separation of powers and the three branches of government and how they are different and how they fit together so well is a beautiful thing. It really is. And here recently in Congress, on the floor of the House, there was a reading of the Constitution. And I thought, well, that's a good place to start. Everyone should read the Constitution. Granted, it is in older style English, you have to think, but it's a really short document, shockingly short. And it just spells out these branches and how they are a check on one another's powers. We will not have an authoritarian regime. We will not have a dictator. We will not have a concentration of power in a single person or entity, because we have two other branches checking that. And so here we have the legislative branch. They get to make laws. They're elected directly by the people to make the laws, so they can look around and see issues that they think should be addressed and say, well, let's make a law for that or against that, mandating something or prohibiting something or regulating something. Let's make a law about that. And that's what the legislature does. The executive, the president, the governor, or an elected executive, basically enforces the law. Here, if you look at Washington, President Obama has a lot of things that he would like to accomplish, but he can't do them. He needs Congress, the legislative branch, to actually enact the laws. And so in that way, he doesn't have the authority to make those laws, so he doesn't get that power. The legislature can make the laws, but can't really enforce them, needs the executive branch to do that. And the judiciary gets to interpret the laws. I can't go out and decide questions that just are brewing out in the public the questions, the issues, the disagreements really have to come to the court. So that's one aspect of the judiciary. We can't go out and, like the legislature, identify any issue that we want to make law on. We have to wait for the questions to come to us. And we're constrained by interpreting the Constitution and the laws and applying them to the facts that are presented. So in that way, if the legislature does something that is outside the bounds of the Constitution, which is really the rules set up that govern our leaders, then the courts get to say, you can go somewhat far in that direction, but you can't go quite that far in that direction. And so in that way, that's a check on the legislature, and the executive can't make the laws, so that's a check on the executive's power, and the judiciary has to wait for the questions to come to them and can't make laws. They can only say what's within the confines of the existing law and Constitution. And so in that way, that's a check on their power. So each of these three entities, they have to work together as a single whole. But no single entity is ever going to become all-powerful.
How unique is this system in terms of globally, other countries, to have the judiciary have this balance, this equal amount of power as the executive and the legislative? Is that a unique system?
I would say it's rare. I don't know whether I'd say it's unique in that there are other countries, typically Western countries, who also give certain authority to the judicial branch. But it is rare, and it's rare in the way that it has developed here.
So going back to the Constitution, we're talking about a document that's over 200 years old. As a judge, what should guide the court's interpretation of the laws and the Constitution?
And so there, if you're asking about how a trial judge should approach that, the trial judge has to be mindful of all the statutes and the Constitution and really give a lot of deference to the legislature. In fact, it's rare that a trial judge would really be called upon to interpret the constitutionality of a particular law. Rather, we're going to defer to the legislature quite a bit and really try to give life to the law as it applies to the facts of a particular case. So in that respect, the trial judge is really has the duty and the function to apply the law rather than critique it or set limits on it. And you know, an interesting thing that people I think overlook about the trial courts is the human element. Because they're granted, you have to abide by the law. We have to apply the law that's made by the legislature or that is given to us, interpreted by higher courts, the Supreme Court, the courts of appeal. But beyond that, there's just this huge human element. I mean, there's a factual element, and there's room for thinking about the parties and their relationships and equitable outcomes and compassion. For people who've been victims of wrongdoing, for people who are families caught up in some kind of situation, and for those even who have, committed some offense. I mean, there is a human element that's presented to the court, and then the trial judges also, I think, are appropriately called upon to behave in a human way as well, in addition to just looking to what the law is and applying it.
What about some of these issues that the framers of the Constitution weren't thinking about at all, like marriage equality? I mean, what should govern and guide the courts?
Well, it's an interesting question, because there we're thinking about really, questions that are being presented to the Supreme Courts of states and the United States Supreme Court. And so we have to recognize how marvelous the engineering of the Constitution is. So we really need to adhere as much as possible to these underpinnings. Because they have served us so well. But at the same time, as you say, 200 years ago, who was thinking about the internet? Who was thinking about gender equality issues, who was thinking about some of the human, cultural relationships that have developed over time that were not the social norm at the time. And so the Constitution needs to be a living document as well. It needs to really be faithful to its roots so that we don't discard the wonderful system that has been created. But it has to obviously be flexible enough and living enough to address these issues 200 years later and 200 years from now.
One more question I have before we have to wrap. We hear a lot about the Constitution in the media today, and a lot of devotion to the Constitution. But I also am concerned about, not concerned, but have a question about sort of the politicization of the system. And I wonder if elections, the way that we elect judges, is problematic at all, and if it creates problems, and why is there a difference in terms of the way that we elect judges in some levels of the judiciary, and in sometimes there's lifetime appointments. Are the elections problematic?
Well, I will not say that the judicial elections are inherently problematic. And let me just clarify that in the federal system, federal trial judges, appellate judges, United States Supreme Court justices, those are lifetime appointments. Those judges will never face election. That's not how they come to office, and they won't face an election. If they're to be removed, it has to be by impeachment. So it's really the state courts at the trial and appellate levels where there are elections. And as long as there's an informed electorate, as long as they are looking for those qualities in their judges that will really produce the kind of action in that branch that you want people who can make tough decisions, even if they are favoring the minority. You don't just want another legislature that is accountable to a majority view, because that's another beauty of the separation of powers. The legislative branch really is there to respond to the majority of constituents who put them in office and expect them to enact laws appropriately. The judicial branch is really there to protect the minority from the tyranny of the majority. So as long as we have an informed electorate that will look out for those issues, and that's what they want in judges, then it doesn't have to be a problem.
Well, we're going to be talking about grooming and informed citizenry with Donna Alonza Vaught in the next half hour of this broadcast. I want to thank you so much for joining us today, and I have so many more questions. I wish I could keep having this conversation with you, but we'll have to cut to some brief messages, but we will be right back.
Lizzie and Me is a family-owned and operated clothing store at 490 Alvarado Street in downtown Monterey. You'll find a visit to Lizzie and Me is fun, elegant, and friendly, with no pressure sales and no price games. They think of themselves as an old-fashioned dress shop, but their selection of clothing and accessories is anything but old-fashioned. Every item in this store has been personally selected for elegance and style. And at Lizzie and Me, they believe that friends and family should be able to shop together. That's why you'll find a wide range of sizes and styles to choose from. With fun and eclectic jewelry and all kinds of clothing and accessories to choose from, you'll be able to find complete outfits for any occasion. Being the old-fashioned yet fun and elegant clothing store that they are, at Lizzie and Me they welcome layaway purchases. No matter what occasion you're shopping for, visit Lizzie and Me, 490 Alvarado Street, where classic style meets fun.
And welcome back. You're watching Evening Insight. I'm your host, Kate Daniels, and we're going to talk in the next half hour with an educator about some of the challenges to grooming an informed citizenry in our local schools. What challenges do our local children face to receiving a good education in Monterey County? What is the meaning of civic education in our schools? Why is it important? Where does it lie in the school curriculum, and how can we improve it? I'm speaking with Donna Alonzo Vaughn. Donna Alonzo Vaughn came to Salinas City Elementary School District as a superintendent in 2003 after more than 20 years as a principal, a guidance counselor, and teacher, including elementary school, middle school, and high school. She earned her bachelor's degree in rural sociology and agricultural economics, her master's in psychology and guidance, and PhD in educational administration from Texas A&M University. Her service to the education community includes Association California School Administrators, San Jose State University Education Administration, and SJSU UC Berkeley Joint Doctorate Advisory Committees, School-to-School Partnership in Spain, Switzerland, Mexico, and Monterey College of Law Lupe M. Alonzo Scholarship Committee. She received the ACSA Golden Apple for School Innovation and was named the Charlie Bittrup Nominee Small School Superintendent of the Year in 2007 and the Salinas, California Person of the Year. Welcome to our broadcast, Donna.
Thank you.
So I didn't read in the bio that you were the very first Texan I ever met as a middle schooler in Carmel Unified School District, but right. It should have been in there. We do go way back.
We do.
Well, I'm glad you're on this program, and I'm glad that we're able to have this conversation about some of the challenges and some of the concerns maybe that you have, and ideas and solutions as well as how we can get our youth that are going to be entering into the electorate more engaged, both as engaged in government, but also in social services and community service. But let's start with why you became an educator. It's not an easy job. I did it for 5 years.
Well, I think like many teachers, and I consider myself a teacher, my classroom just keeps expanding. It's a mission. It's a mission to work with the children of the United States of America and to engage them, and I keep taking it up to a different level and with my students. It's all about student learning.
Well, you're working in a state that used to have a prized education system. It was one of the best in the country, and that's certainly not the case now. Will you break down some of the factors that affect student performance in the different districts in Monterey County?
Well, this is my 26th year in Monterey County, my 31st year in education, and you alluded to the fact that I began my career in California in Carmel, and while it's only 17 miles, it's a long way from Carmel to my East Salinas schools. I'm the superintendent of Salinas City. That's the largest elementary district in the county. There are 25 districts, and they are very diverse, from the coastal communities to the valley communities to the Salinas communities. And that in and of itself is a challenge. One size does not fit all in education. And we have poverty issues, we have English as a second language issues, and we have tremendous funding issues in this county.
Let's talk about the funding and some of the factors that come into play. When I was doing some research for this broadcast, according to one website, per pupil spending in the district where you are in, Salinas City Elementary School District, is listed at $7,899 compared to the district you first started out at, Carmel Unified, where it's $15,931. What are some of the factors that play into this vast discrepancy?
We're funded completely differently. Carmel is what we call a basic aid district, and its funding is outside of the old Prop 16, meaning that Carmel gets its funding locally, not from the state, like the majority of the ADA districts. Pacific Grove is also a basic aid district. The remaining 23 districts in the county rely on federal and state and local funding for their revenue.
You know, this isn't a question I was planning on asking you, but thinking about some of the movies that have come out this year, Waiting for Superman and The Lottery, some of the documentaries, one of the visuals that pulls on people's heartstrings is the visual of the child who knows that they may have an opportunity if they go one route, and they may not have as many opportunities if they go another route. Is there an awareness among students in your school district of this discrepancy?
I don't
that
believe
there's
so.
schools that have, is there awareness among parents? Talking about civic engagement, there is something that can be done by parents, but we're talking about parents who are extremely busy and have a wealth of other priorities. Is there an active?
It varies by community. And you make a very interesting point in that one of the areas that many of the districts find a need to focus on is parent education. In my district, we have schools that have high illiteracy rates for parents. And it's very difficult to be informed if at home there is an illiteracy issue. I have one particular school, which is what I would consider my most needy school, and 71% of the parent with highest education has self-reported is not a high school graduate. That's a very difficult playing field to level.
And when you compare that, when you combine that with the graduation rate and the language barrier, it creates a very difficult position in terms of being a supportive parent and helping with an education. I wonder a lot about solutions and what can be done. The conversation that we usually have is budgetary, and it's about money. But no amount of money can create an environment where a parent can help a child with their homework if they can't read if they don't speak the language.
Absolutely.
So what kind of creative solutions are educators thinking about?
Well, one of the issues that we find with English language learner students is that when they are coming into our system, and this is not unique to Salinas, you'll find this in many school districts, children, and when you're talking about English language learners, primarily Spanish-speaking families, the children are not literate in Spanish or English. They're coming in with what we call a command language for whatever reason. Maybe it's that there's only one parent who is working in the home, or both parents are working outside of the home. Their command language skills are, come eat, get your brother, go to bed. There's no embellishing, there's no questioning, there's no tell me a story, there's no read me a story, because their existence is getting food and shelter. And so it's a different paradigm completely than if you have a child who comes to school who is well fed and isn't worried about where they're going to sleep that night, and comes from a loving family who's reading to them and engaging them and taking them to various outside resources. One of the, if you want to remember why you're in education, you can ride the bus when we take third graders to the aquarium for the first time. And when the bus from Salinas tops that hill, you don't look at the ocean view, you look at the faces of the children as they see the ocean for the first time, and they only live 17 miles down the road. But it is not in their world to take a trip to the aquarium or to the ocean.
Let's talk a little bit more about their world. I saw something that was shocking online, that Salinas made the top 25 list for cities with the highest percentage of foreclosure filings in the entire United States. So how did you see the housing market crisis affecting your students?
We have a phenomenon we call end of the month syndrome, where toward the end of the month, you start seeing an acceleration of child behavior problems. You see more children eating both breakfast and lunch at school, and it's because they know they're going to get evicted from wherever they're staying, and they're just preparing themselves. And these are small children. You remember, my district is preschool, kinder through 6th grade. I have over 900 homeless students, verified, documented homeless students, in a district of 8,500 children.
Okay, let's talk about, I don't want to get into any more of the factors because there's so many that we can talk about. But, words like an achievement gap get thrown around. Among 18 to 24-year-olds in California, Latinos are the most likely to have no high school diploma, and they're the least likely to go to college. What does this say about, the conversation that we were just having with the judge? Mm-hmm. This doesn't bode well for young people becoming active citizens in our democracy when they might not even get the education to really understand what our democracy consists of and the power that they have as people. What is this going to change in our lifetime? Is it just going to get worse? It is changing.
I have to tell you, there's been a huge paradigm shift in public education. And public education, to stay on topic, is the greatest hope for a continued democracy in this country. We are the only country that educates 100% of its children. And we're the only country that has such a belief in the power of a public education, a free and appropriate public education. And we've changed that paradigm shift to it's no longer about just presenting materials. It's about student learning, individual responsibility. It is a paradigm shift to being absolutely sure that the child is learning the core essential standards that are required. In a democratic society, that's national identity. When you think about what we expect to be a good citizen, national identity is first, constitutional heritage, and then civic values, rights, and responsibilities. And the expectation is on public school to teach those things. It would be wonderful if those were backed up and reinforced in the home, but that's not the way we are now presenting things. As I say, it's all about student learning, no longer about the presentation.
Yeah, according to former Supreme Court Justice Sandra Day O'Connor, I read that 80% of Americans could not pass the citizenship test that immigrants have to take to become citizens if we had to take it. And I also read recently that because of the shift to moving to tests and standardized tests, we've focused on where American children are lacking, and that's been in areas like the math and the sciences. And over half the states in the country don't even have a civics requirement anymore in their schools. Does that concern you?
Absolutely. Fortunately, California does still require civics and economics, and they're both semester courses the senior year, but again, that the constitutional heritage and civic values, that is a thread that runs through the California curriculums from kindergarten on. There are different strands of core essential standards that run through every single history and social studies course in California. Now, you can argue that with the advent of No Child Left Behind in program improvement schools, there is less of an emphasis, less time permitted in program improvement districts for science and social studies, for the arts, for PE.
What do you think about standardized testing for or programs like No Child Left Behind for students in districts like yours? I have an anecdote, a story. I did some volunteer teaching for fourth graders in Los Angeles in a school where students were underperforming. And I was sitting with a child and we were doing an exercise practicing for one of these tests. And it was amazing to me what he got the answer to the question wrong, but the way he thought it through was brilliant. So it's a Spanish-speaking student, and he asks them a question of where would you buy where would you buy pasta? Thank you. Where would you buy pasta? And it lists the drugstore, the supermarket, the auto body shop, who knows? It was a list of different places you could go. And the kid didn't know the word pasta, but he said to himself, you know what, in Spanish, pasta is part of the word for toothpaste. So I'm going to guess that it's paste, it's some kind of paste, and you're going to buy it in the drugstore. And of course, he got it wrong. But that kind of analytical thinking, it absolutely didn't reach the kind of test that he was taking, was poorly constructed for this child. I mean, is that a problem that's throughout standardized testing?
I'm of course biased against the way the standardized testing is administered in the United States, but I'm biased for the reason that I have a district that's heavily English language learner. And there are 5 levels to the standard-based testing, to program improvement. And the bias I have is that if you do not speak English when you enter into our school system, as so many of our children don't, you logically start at level 1. Well, our testing system only acknowledges, it's an all or nothing acknowledgement at level 4. So districts with high numbers of English learners receive no credit for moving them from 1 to 2, 2 to 3, 3, until you get to level 4 of a 5-level system. That's a bias for me. The other bias I have is that if you have a white middle-class student, their test score is counted once. If you look at the districts in Monterey County that have the highest test scores, Carmel, Washington Union, Pacific Grove, they're predominantly white middle-class districts. Their scores are counted for once. If you happen to be a child of color, you are an English learner, and God forbid you be poor, your test scores count in 3 subgroups.
Repeat that for me. Break that down.
Okay.
I'm not following. I mean, that's...
You are classified in subgroups for the purposes of testing for program improvement.
Got it.
If you are white, middle class, your test score counts in 1 subgroup. If you're a child of color, black, Hispanic, Filipino, if you are poor, and if you're an English learner,
3 times.
3 different subgroups.
So how have you been...
4 if you're in special ed.
How have you been, for lack of a better word, punished in your district when your students do not perform well on these tests? What has, I mean, just for folks that are outside the education, what are the consequences?
We are fortunate in that we've made progress, and we continue to make very good progress. There are other districts too in this county that have administrative trustees for academics. That one has superseded the power of the Board of Education.
And where does this trustee come from?
It was appointed by the state.
Are they even from the area?
They are not.
Wow.
They're not. There are actually 3 trustees in this county, 1 for finances and 2 for academics. And the 1 for finances and 1 of the 2 trustees for academics have complete authority, and the Board of Education is advisory. And that is of great concern because that balance is no longer there.
Amazing. So we've talked about a lot of the challenges that you face as an educator in your district. Going back to the original conversation about civic engagement, what are some of the ways that you integrate, in terms of concepts and exercises, civic engagement and responsibility? Is it even something you have a lot of time to?
Oh, absolutely. It's extremely important on 2 different levels. 1, in the classroom, and 2, with parent involvement. We are doing everything in our power to empower our parents to take control of their neighborhood schools through that school site council, through DLAC or DMAC, which are migrant or English language committees. We are doing a lot of parent education because our focus, because my teachers are working so hard in the classroom. They really are. I defy anyone to come into any of my schools and not see how hard students and teachers are working. We are placing our emphasis on preschool and parent education. And we are working really hard with parents, especially immigrant parents who have no concept of this system and have difficulties with communication, to help them to help their students.
In terms of civic engagement, I've always sort of fantasized that I worked at a private school, very elite private school where I taught for 5 years, and it was so clear and so disturbing, the difference, and especially when it came to college, applying for colleges, and the way that these kids were literally placed in the finest universities in the country, and what did that leave for everybody else. But I always wondered if, there was a way that locally members of our community could be getting more civically engaged ourselves and providing what's missing for these students so they can get the same kind of education. I mean, where is the volunteerism? Do you see it in your district? Does it happen? Do volunteers from even some of the more affluent communities that are maybe have a lot of retired population? I mean, do you see people giving back?
We actively recruit those populations. Because for the most part, and this is not just a Salinas issue, this is an issue everywhere. Typically, given the age of parents of elementary school students, who are your most active in school, they tend to fall off in middle school and high school because, kids don't really want their parents to be that involved in those grade levels. They're working, and so we have to find ways around that. I was sharing with someone earlier that November through March is when we do most of our field trips that involve parents, because we do have a large percentage of parents that work in agriculture, and that's their off season so that they can participate. We actively go out of our way to find ways for parents to participate with their children and give them the tools to do that. We actively seek other adult help with reading with children, or volunteering in a classroom, volunteering in a library, those type activities. We support the grandparents, the volunteer grandparent program, and we have Grandparent Day, and we bring retired people back in to work with kids, because we're starting to see a real loss in that extended family, and children really relate to that skipping a generation. So we've been very successful with that. We use CSUMB, AmeriCorps, America Reads, MIIS. Anywhere there's someone that's got volunteer hours that they need to use, we welcome them in the schools.
And if someone is interested in just watching this broadcast and wants to get involved in the schools, where do they start? Who do they contact?
They can contact Monterey County Office of Education, or they can contact their local school or their local school district.
Let's talk a little bit before we have to end about your own civic engagement. Much has been written about civic disengagement. I mentioned in the beginning that we've become this country, nation of spectators, and you're clearly not a spectator in education, but you also ran for public office. Can you talk about that experience and what made you decide to do that in the last election?
Well, actually, I was sought out to run, and I do believe that it's healthy to have more than one candidate run for position. I felt very, very strongly that our county needed to get more in touch with districts on a more intimate level. I'm a very hands-on person. I believe that administration needs to be in classrooms, because I think change happens in a classroom. And so I ran for the office of the County Superintendent of Schools because I really felt like with 3 outside state trustees in our county that there was a disconnect between the services provided. I'm, of course, perfectly happy to stay doing what I do. I am, as I've often said, I'm on a mission because I do believe in our youth and I do believe in the system. So it was an interesting experience. I don't think I'm very good at that system. I didn't particularly care for the politicking, for the running for the office. I'm not sure that I agree that should be an elected position. So that doesn't make for a really great candidate when you don't really believe it should be elected.
I think you did it very well. That was a very close race.
Thank you very much.
It was a very close race. Tell me your tagline. I loved it. It was the mind of a businesswoman, the heart of a teacher.
Yes.
This is a loaded question, but from the mind of a businesswoman and the heart of a teacher, what do we do about our system of education in California? What is your hope for the future? And what do you think our best chances at really getting back the education for all kids that they deserve is?
Well, first and foremost, you have to focus on the children, on the classroom. I'm very, very excited. Governor Brown has appointed a new school board, which is pro-public education. That was not particularly the bent of the last state school board. So we're very excited about that. We have a new state superintendent of public instruction in Tom Torlickson, and he is a former teacher who really understands the system. As a businesswoman, we have got to cut out some of the misuse of funds that's occurring. Some of that is absolutely not in the purview of districts or schools. We are bound by federal regulations and by some of the constraints of the Program Improvement No Child Left Behind Act that forces us to divert much needed resources into programs that are not effective and are not even evaluated. So we need to cut some of that out. And I believe now we have a state superintendent of public instruction and a state board that is very willing to look at those things.
Do you think that you'll run again?
That's 4 years away.
Well, I'll come back to you with that question. Donna, Alonza, Vaught, it's been a pleasure to have you on our broadcast. I think this has been an intriguing and an engaging conversation, and I'm really pleased that you chose to join us this evening. Thank you so much. And that's all for tonight's broadcast. Evening Insight is recorded in front of a live audience at Cafe 316 in downtown Monterey. If you'd like to be a part of our studio audience, please just stop by Cafe 316 or visit us at cafe316.net online. You can also receive notifications about our future broadcasts by following us on Facebook and joining our fan page. If you or someone you know would like to be a guest on Evening Insight, please contact our executive producer, Timothy Barrett, directly. And also, if you're interested in becoming a part of our family of businesses, you too can also contact executive producer Timothy Barrett at 831-706-2728. Thank you for joining me for this broadcast of Evening Insight. We'll see you next time. Good night.
Out-of-town guests appearing on Evening Insight are accommodated at the Inn at Del Monte Beach, offering urban elegance to discriminating travelers. Evening Insight is produced on location in downtown Monterey at Cafe 316, the place for coffee with a touch of sophistication in a Wi-Fi friendly and comfortable setting. Cafe 316 on Alvarado Street in downtown Monterey, opposite the Monterey Conference Center at Portola Plaza.
I get my comfort there.